your sufferings, my child, have never taught you wisdom. Here. This marriage needs no sorrows, no tears. Mother, crown my triumph with a wreath.
Pandora dreamt she finally got to the house, only to find both Paris and Helen already there, and the estate in collapse. How long had they been there? And what had they been doing? Helen was the Fire Palace Dryad again. How many times had Pandora lived through this already? Too much vodka, and, pathetically, also drunk on the attention of her husband, uncharacteristically interested in her for the next 5 minutes at least. As usual, it was too much for the poor fickle woman. She discarded all of her power, all of her dignity at times like this. She clung to him like a life raft in a wine-dark sea. It turned Pandora's stomach to watch. She could try and remind Helen, speak of Aeneas and Jason, of Theseus and Odysseus. But experience had taught Pandora that Helen would always be deaf and blind to her cries. Too busy convincing herself it would last, too busy justifying the years of misery, she groveled abjectly, savoring the tiny crumbs of favor he'd tossed to her when it amused him or served his vague, inscrutable purpose. Watching Helen clutch after these moments had stunted Pandora, made her weak and stupid with men, tolerant of all sorts of mistreatment, lies, and selfish behavior in her younger years. And inevitably, when it was over, what would Helen do? She'd climb back down into the foxhole with Pandora and cry rivers of tears over her rough tumble back into the pit of his contempt, their home most of the time. Pandora, the loyal foot soldier, never invited out of the trenches and only faintly detecting stories about what went on up above, would mop up the tears and nod kindly at Helen while she swore never again. Pandora never asked for any of this. And the house, oh, the house, what a mess. She set about to clean it up, but it quickly became clear this was a monumental task. Dirty dishes and disgusting full ashtrays everywhere. Room after room after room strewn with clothes, newspapers, books, and trash. The exquisite furnishings had been abused. The paintings, the caskets of jewelry, the strange ornaments that had been stockpiled in hidden closets and closed-off rooms, draped in layers of sheets and stacked up to ceilings, had all been discovered and scattered everywhere. Like the Greeks had washed up on the shore, and now the detritus after the tide was her problem. The bathrooms were torn apart, and the plumbing would not work. The vast kitchens had been gutted. Pandora's own suite was bizarrely covered in layers of seaweed and something that smelled like bog mud. She gathered and carried, scrubbed and polished, and somehow, when her back was turned, all of the wreckage would reappear. Every bit of progress she made felt undone just minutes later. And then she paused in her labors to go and stand at the window and observe the landscape, now quickly becoming nothing but seascape. What before had been a mile of rocky coast, of birds and plants and sand, had somehow been swallowed up by the ocean, and now only a narrow strip of land remained. At high tide, the angry waters surged up close enough that salt spray crusted the windows, and she swore as she stood there she could see it creeping closer by the second. She knew that before long the waves would come to claim the house. They had all been too complacent. They had all fiddled while it drowned around them, and everything would be lost. upon her ascension, when finally she would stand and be judged for her stewardship, her legacy would crumble into the churning, foaming drink. The choking terror shook her. Consumed with visions of impending chaos and panic, she longed to turn and run, but there was no sanctuary, only the sea.